So how can we work all this out now? I've already showed you the beginning fulfillment of this. The Christians like to take this last week and move it way forward into the future and not apply it to the destruction of the temple at all, but apply it to the destruction of the third temple, which is yet to be built again, and tell us about a charismatic leader who they call the Antichrist, who is going to be Satan incarnate, and he's going to be a charismatic fellow, and there is going to be world peace. He's going to make the covenant with many for 1 week or the 7-year period, and in the midst of that week he's going to show his true colors. And the Christians argue that Jesus is going to have the rapture at the beginning of the week or in the middle of the week or at the end of the week, and we can let them just argue about when that happens. There's also a secular interpretation of these passages which shows up remarkably well. If you recall that there were 2 starting dates from the 2 prophecies in Jeremiah, one of 605 BC, when it was first subjugated by Nebuchadnezzar, and the actual date of the destruction of the temple of 587 BC, when the temple was destroyed and all the Jewish leaders were taken captive into Babylon. Well, starting at that date, as we've already done in the past videos and showed you, if you move forward 49 years, here comes Cyrus, the king of Persia, with his decree allowing the people to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the city in the temple. Now, if we take the balance of the time here, the 62 weeks in Daniel 9:25, and we start at the 605 BC date, we can move forward in time from there. We'll arrive at 171 BC. And this is the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. This is the time of the silent years, we're told, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And in Antiquities, Book 12, Chapter 5, we can read that there was a high priest, and secular dating puts this event around 171 BC, the death of Onias, the high priest. Coincidentally, he had a son whom the people wanted to pass the high priesthood onto, and his name was Jesus, who changed his name to Jason. But the king prevented him from becoming the high priest, and he installed someone else. 3.5 years later, Antiochus Epiphanes went to battle with Egypt. He lost. He was on his way back, and Antiochus Epiphanes stopped in Jerusalem. He was trying to force the Greek culture onto the people of Judea, and had much success. A lot of the young men liked the gymnastics. They liked the culture, and they liked the Greek religion. But some of them did not want to give up their heritage. They did not want to get involved with the Greeks, but they were forbidden to do that. And Antiochus Epiphanes, on his way back, it says that he burnt down the most beautiful buildings, their principal buildings, and I assume that would include at least part of the temple. He also set up an idol in the temple, and he sacrificed a pig on the altar there. And he insisted that swine be sacrificed daily on the altar, the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel. This happened in 167 BC. He also crucified many people there. You can also read that in Josephus. And hung about the necks of these people he had crucified their circumcised children, because he was forbidding them to circumcise their children. He wanted to stop them from practicing their faith and wanted to force the Greek culture upon them. And finally, after Antiochus had died in 164 BC, the temple was regained by Judas Maccabees and rededicated. And this is where the Jews of today get their feast of Hanukkah from. It was the dedication of the temple at that time. So within that 171 to 164 BC, you have a fulfillment of exactly what it said in the book of Daniel. Now the Jews today also have another way of interpreting this, because they have their own timetable. And this year, 2008, is in Jewish time the 5,768th year. So if we use that as a guide and we subtract 1,938 years from our 2008 date, we will arrive at 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed by Titus. And moving back another 7 years, we will arrive at the date of 63 CE. Now the Jews claimed that Nero had made an agreement with the people in 63 AD and that the priest would make a sacrifice in the temple on the behalf of Caesar as a daily thing. And finally in 66 AD or CE, the high priest refused to do that. And there was a rebellion that went up, and that's when Titus finally came along and held Jerusalem under siege, and it finally fell and the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. And if we go back from that, we'll arrive at the figure of 3340 as the date that they say that the temple was destroyed. The only problem with that is if we use our secular dating and follow that back, we can tell that their dating system and secular dating system is off by 167 years. So in other words, if we use their 3340, if we take that and subtract it from 2008, we will see we're going to arrive at a figure roughly of 420 BC as the date of the destruction of Jerusalem, whereas our secular historians tell us that it's happened in 587 BC. You see, there's a 167 year discrepancy between Jewish dating and secular dating. But at any rate, and there is also some thought from the Jews too who interpret this not with Nero, but with the death of Agrippa II, and that they say he was the anointed one that we read about in verse 926 of Daniel. And then again afterwards, that under Hadrian, after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, set up an idol on the Temple Mount. But it seems like the secular thing that arrives at a fulfillment back in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes fits this book to a T. So we'll never resolve totally, but definitely, this prophecy was not about Jesus.